So to think that you can just go in and kind of create a brand new technology without stepping on someone else's technology is a little bit naive in a way. There's a lot of technologies that may not be officially standardized, but essentially they operate almost as like a de facto standard. You certainly could create a program around.
Welcome to Clause 8, the #1 podcast on intellectual property, hosted by Eli Mazur.
Can you tell us, how did you end up in patents? Do you remember the first time you heard about patent pools?
Right. So the first time about patent pools was at Dolby, but my history, in patents goes way back. So I began my career as a patent prosecutor. I did that all too common pivot from engineering over to patent law. Started out as a patent prosecutor, then pivoted into being a patent litigator at Skadden in their Palo Alto office for several years. Then moved over to Dolby. And really at Dolby, they had Via Licensing Alliance when I joined about 14 years ago. Via Licensing Alliance, we're certainly not a new organization. So we were founded over 28 years ago, and some of the original employees still remain with us today. But that was really when I first learned about the concept and structure of collaborative licensing generally, and all the value that I can create for both licensors and licensees. At Dolby, I had a 14-year history there. The first 7, I was really leading the audio patent team. And back then, Dolby, the patent group, was responsible more or less for every aspect of intellectual property. So we did patent licensing, patent litigation, patent prosecution, even patent acquisitions. And that's when I really first started getting involved in the standard setting process as well. So I was representing Dolby back then at the MPEG meetings, and even represented Dolby at Via's very own AAC program, for example. That's really my first foray into the collaborative licensing world and the patent pool world. So it was about 12 years ago today. And now I've completed the circle by being, appointed the new president of Via Licensing, and I'm super excited about it.
So it's interesting. You saw the patent system from different perspectives, obtaining patents in patent prosecution, then litigating them. But you didn't come across patent pools until you joined Dolby. Do you remember what you thought? You've experienced all these different parts of the patent system before then. What did you think about patent pools when you first heard about them? And what was your how did that fit in with your experience? Yeah.
My initial gut reaction was, wow, this is a great construct. It really creates this win-win opportunity for both innovators and implementers. And when you're at a law firm litigating, you're usually just representing one client who has a very narrow focus, and you don't even really get to see how patents and IP really fit into their business roadmap. But when you're at a company like Dolby, obviously, you need to understand kind of the combination and intersection of business law and technology. And I like to think that's what we do really well at Via still today, where we're trying to create programs that are really going to provide really efficient market mechanisms to really serve as a bridge between licensors and licensees. And in order to do that, I encourage all my members of my organization to really have a good understanding of the business, the law, and the technology, because it's really only then that you can start seeing these efficiencies and really start launching like new programs that really are going to unlock the efficiencies in the marketplace. So like I said, my initial reaction patent pools, I was like, wow, this makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. I'm a big believer in just trying to make great technology more accessible to the market. And that is essentially what patent pools are trying to do. They're trying to get in there early, set what is, believed to be, the friend rate, that sweet spot between the licensor and the licensee, to make sure that the technology does become commercially successful and adopted. So when I heard of the general construct, I was super interested in it. I thought it was a very interesting framework that had a very similar goal to what I personally believe in, which is technology is important. Technology really does make a difference. And I want to make sure that great technology does become commercially successful. And that's really what I believe patent pools are all about.
I'm sure you were a very successful patent litigator, but did you ever think, once you joined Dolby, hey, Dolby's really leaving money on the table by participating in these patent pools instead of going out there and, bilateral, licensing on their portfolio and litigating when necessary without these patent pools?
It was a really interesting place, and I feel fortunate to have been there because they really value two things. The first thing is they really value relationships, right? And that's not just relationship with Dolby's customers, because obviously Dolby has technology solutions that they are licensing and selling into the marketplace, but they also just value kind of equity and fairness in the whole ecosystem as well. So when you take those two prongs, the first is that relationships matter, and the second, that fairness generally is important to ensure the success of technology. Dolby's always had that where they've never aggressively priced their technology offerings. They really believe that, with widespread adoption, you will more than make up for it if maybe your rate is set a little lower than what you could have initially done in the market. So that kind of was really good background for me to join an organization like VIA, because that is our mandate. We're here to really serve as a trusted bridge between innovators and implementers. We're not trying to just extract as much money as we possibly can from the licensors. Conversely, we're not trying to set such a low rate so that implementers are always going to be happy. We're really trying to find that middle ground that can really help, like I said, make the technology more useful and accessible to the marketplace. And we have 20 years of experience doing that. And I like to think that VIA is uniquely positioned in that regard, where when we do set and create our programs, they are well received by the marketplace. And the evidence is just look at some of our programs. So our AAC and AVC program, they're two of the world's most successful. And we had a lot of really early success with the Qi Wireless program, where now we actually have 50% of the market licensed into that Qi Wireless charging program, and about 50% of the patent stack as well. And that's what really makes Pool successful. It's really about, finding that balance, understanding the needs of the market, and not trying to play to one side or the other too aggressively.
You mentioned obviously you came to VIA through Dolby, like the previous president. I think there's a understanding that, I guess, can you tell us what is the relationship between VIA and Dolby?
Right. So Dolby is a shareholder. So there are three shareholders to the organization, Dolby being one of them. So we do obviously have, close partnerships with all of our shareholders. Like I said, there's always a working relationship with any of our partners. So we do like to feel that all of our shareholders are also vested in the same common goals that VIA has, which is to really encourage the adoption of great technology. So it's been, a pleasure working with, the rest of the board members and our shareholder organizations to further that mission.
You've mentioned some of the programs that have been really successful at VIA, and I guess a lot of those were started before your time. Where do you see, I guess, the future of VIA? Is it kind of continuing that path, or in any different direction that you envision?
Right. So we have done a refocusing since I've been on board. So I think the first refocusing is that we're really kind of trying to double down on customer service. I firmly believe that, our customers, in terms of our licensors and our licensees, we need to be ensuring that we're providing as high quality customer service as possible.
And what do you mean by that, by customer service, I guess,
Well, customer service just means being responsive to their needs, ensuring that the technology that we're offering, works well. Like we have, for example, reporting portals where licensees have to go in each quarter and submit reports. We have to issue invoices. Patent pool administration, it's not an easy thing. I mean, there's a lot of back end systems that are happening. We need to make sure that we're maintaining relationships with both the licensors and the licensees. They're getting the data that they need. Their questions are being answered in a timely manner. All of the, reporting that we give back to them, whether it's the, royalty payout for licensors, or it's something as simple as just managing the tax certificates on the licensee side. All of that needs to run very smoothly and efficiently to ensure that we're providing, great customer service. Patent pools, it's hard for me to say this, but I speak to a lot of the other licensees and licensors. We do a very good job at VIA in terms of having well-defined systems and processes in place. So all of that back end stuff just naturally works, and it works well. But that's not the same. You do see varying levels of customer service across the patent pool administrators. And I like to think that VIA is known for providing, like I said, very good customer service, but we're even trying to take it up to another level and making sure that we are providing exceptional customer service across the board that really cannot be matched by any other administrator.
Around the same time that you became president, Access Advance picked up some of programs that VIA had. Can you tell us what was behind that, and does that shift kind of a thinking maybe in the strategy of VIA's or its, I guess, the customers that you have?
Right. So that was the HEVC pool I think you're referring to. So that pool was divested over to Access Advance. And at the end of the day, that was just the right move for the ecosystem, right? I mean, fragmentation is never a good thing. Fragmentation on the licensor side is never a good thing. Fragmentation among pools is never a good thing either. Just logistically managing the reconciliation process, for example, when you have kind of like dual or even three pool structures, is just not an efficient way of doing what we believe we want to do. VIA is all about creating market efficiencies and kind of supporting the ecosystem. So I think you can think of that transaction as just furthering, those goals. So it was a natural thing for us to do, encourage additional collaboration, and really getting to a place where you can argue that there is potentially a one or two stop shop for a lot of the technologies. I know HEVC is still somewhat fragmented, but certainly it's headed in the right direction.
And how did that come about, the idea for Access Advanced to take that over?
So now you're talking about before my time, so I
Oh,
can't speak directly to
okay.
that, Eli. But I
Okay.
think if I had to surmise and just guess,
Yeah.
Dolby is all about doing the right thing and supporting ecosystems. So I think at the end of the day, they probably recognize that being in multiple pools is not efficient for anyone. So consolidation, was something, and I can speak directly to this because at Dolby I did run the compliance function for 7 years, so I was out there pounding pavement, talking to a lot of the big licensees that we have in our pools, and even specifically the HEVC pool. And even I heard directly from licensees, about the need for consolidation. They did not like the current structure. They did not like having to go to multiple pools that arguably had conflicting rates. It just creates uncertainty in the marketplace. It slows things down. It creates inefficiencies and bottlenecks, and it's really not good for the ecosystem. So like I said, I can't speak directly to why the decision was made, but if I had to surmise, it would be that we're always trying to further the ecosystem. And VIA is fortunate enough that we're in a really, good position that we have over, a dozen active licensing programs ranging from EV charging and wireless power to speech and media codecs, like I mentioned, our AAC and ABC programs. So we're really well diversified. So I think at the end of the day, we had plenty of other programs that we could pivot and refocus on and make them successful. And case in point is our voice codec program, where we just signed up our first licensee. We have two of the original contributing licensors that were active during standardization, NTT and Huawei, currently in our programs. And we're looking forward to some more positive, announcements both in the cheese space and the voice space in the near future.
You mentioned a lot of different technologies, but there's some major ones, right? Like, I could think of like cellular, video, audio, some major technologies that'll be in play, and there's multiple pools. Do you kind of see like, hey, this is VIA's role in the ecosystem? Because I'm sure, everybody's kind of thinking about these similar technologies that are out there, about how to facilitate the efficiencies in the market as a pool administrator. But do you see that VIA has a certain role in the ecosystem? I guess particular role.
I think we do. I mean, I think we're seen as the leader. We're seen as certainly the leader in collaborative licensing, but also because we've been operating for over 20 years, I think we also have the respect and the reputation in the industry for, like I said, creating well-balanced programs. So we have a creative, innovative bunch of employees. Our bench is extremely deep across all of the various functions, from program management to licensing to new pool development to operations to the legal side. So I think you're right. We do feel that VIA has a very large part to play in ensuring the health of the ecosystem in a lot of these spaces. And that's why, for example, when we try to create new pools, we're really trying to be innovative and tap into new technologies. We're not trying to, emulate others. We have a strong belief in what we do, and we have a strong, deep connections in the industry, and we actually have a really good understanding of the technology and its importance in the marketplace. So we're going to continue to, play that role in the licensing ecosystem. And like I said, we're going to continue to look for innovative ways to create new programs to really help shore up some of these, ecosystems that really aren't as clear as they should be in terms of, well, what is the IP risk? What is the licensing cost? No one wants litigation, right? No one wants endless litigation with lots and lots of patent holders. So we're going to continue to do what we do best, which is create well-balanced programs that really unlock the technology, make it more accessible to both innovators and implementers and consumers alike, and continue to create value that way.
But in terms of technology, or in terms of the types of licensees, do you view it that way? Like, these are the new pools that are a good fit for VIA versus,
Right.
or I guess maybe another way is, how do you identify the new potential pools, I guess. What is
Those are our trade secrets, Eli. So
uh,
I'm telling you, I think you're right to the extent, and this is basic information. So there's nothing,
yeah.
inherently valuable in what I'm telling you here other than that. Of course, we look at our core. So we look at our core foundation. And if you look at what we have a really strong AVC program on the video side, a super strong AAC program on the audio side. So the media codec space is a space that we generally operate in. And then you can look out a little bit further and look at what are some closely related fields to those. And you can start looking at other technologies that maybe are used in cell phones and smartphones, for example, or set-top boxes and TVs, because these are product classes that we're well aware of. Then if you go out a little bit further, you can even look at the expertise within our organization. And I think you mentioned, the data center and semiconductor programs. We have a really deep bench on those technologies. So that's kind of our next natural kind of growth area. Don't want to give away too much on those, Eli, because there's still a lot in progress that we're working on that we're going to be announcing and launching hopefully over the next 6 months in the year. But again, I think that's generally the way that we think about it. Is we certainly have a core focus area, but then outside of that, we're not afraid to explore in new areas where we have expertise and we feel like our skill set and our collaborative licensing structure can add value. And like I said, we're very innovative. So we have a lot of great ideas to come to kind of, like I said, continue to unlock even new technologies where really patent pools have never really played in before. So that's what we're excited about to do in the future.
And you mentioned semiconductor. Obviously, I think VIA announced a semiconductor pool back in November of 2025. Any updates about that?
Well, you should be hearing shortly about the official launch of that program in terms of the DRAM memory pool. So again, that is something we're looking forward to continuing to work on. And then we do have, like I said, continued plans in that space. I can't reveal too much more than that, just because our specific plans into the specific technologies that are still under development. Obviously, we're going to wait until we actually launch and go live with those. But you will hear more to come from us, Eli. Like I said, we do have really good technical expertise and deep connections in the industry that we feel are going to give us a competitive advantage when we obviously do launch these programs.
One of I was fortunate to attend VIA's Bridge Summit in San Francisco last year, and one of my takeaways is that you do see some of the implementers who, might not be so positive about patents elsewhere, but at your Bridge Summit, they seem to kind of understand what it's about and be kind of positive participants and trying to learn about the ecosystem. But I want to talk about some of those other activities. I guess they might be engaged with. One of them, obviously, is the AV1 standard, which is the video standard, which was set up by some of the big tech companies. So I'm assuming they wouldn't have to license some of these other standards through patent pools. What is your thought about that? It's been in existence for a few years, but what do you think about that? Are you concerned that might be a model they emulate in other areas?
Right. So I think the AO media model, you mean for AV1 in terms of the whole royalty-free, licensing structure. I mean, that's a path you can certainly take. But I think the current administration, right, has just reiterated that just because something is royalty-free doesn't mean there's no anti-competitive effects, right? And in some cases, when you think about it, if you have large, implementers coming together and mandating anyone who participates into this arguably standardization process contribute their patents on royalty-free terms, that actually does even heighten the level of scrutiny that I think the government is now looking at, and particularly the current administration and the current DOJ, into whether these are actually competitive or not. So I think they're going to have their own struggles to deal with. I think I understand the rationale. I mean, everyone at the end of the day wants to avoid paying out money. But I think, as you've seen with a lot of these technologies, there are other patent holders that are not going to be actively contributing. And that even if you do try to mandate and dictate a royalty-free kind of obligation on all the active participants, you're still not doing what their goal is, which I think was to create a complete royalty-free solution. And unfortunately, I think in today's modern world, technology is increasingly complex. So any modern technology is going to be building upon decades and decades of prior innovation from countless numbers of would-be licensors. So to think that you can just go in and kind of create a brand new technology that's competitive with the current marketplace without stepping on someone else's technology is a little bit naive in a way. So I understand that, why they may have done things like that. Like I said, I think they have their own kind of anti-competitive, issues that they need to, work through. So we don't see them kind of as a direct threat, because there's always a need, like I said, for patent pools, for people who want to license their technology on FRAN principles. And it's really just about that cycle of innovation, right? You get that cycle of innovation when you properly reward innovators. When you don't properly reward innovators and they try to take shortcuts, then you can end up with things, potentially like AV1, where they may argue that it's supposed to be royalty free, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't turn out to be royalty free. So I think there's a lot to kind of digest there, but I think the current DOJ and the administration, in terms of how they're closely scrutinizing some of these mandatory royalty free, pool type structures, um, it's just certainly something that they're going to have to kick the tires on and really figure out kind of where they land there. But I don't see it as directly impacting the work that we do here, at VIA. And as you can see, others have already created pools around some of these codecs that arguably were royalty free.
That's interesting. So do you envision that you might create pools to support these royalty-free royalty-free standards? So I guess the implementers who ended up implementing that would kind of have an efficient way
There's
to
no reason why you couldn't do that. So if there's enough licensors that weren't actively participating in these arguably these codecs that were designed to be royalty free, their technology cannot just be freely used without their permission. So that means they still need a path to actually monetize that and get a fair return on their investment. Whether they do that bilaterally or whether there's enough of them to actually create a pool, that's going to be on a case by case basis. I mean, the pool, as you know, Eli, it creates efficiencies when you have multiple licensors coming together, aggregating all of their IP, and then offering that bundled license at one rate. So, if there is enough fragmentation, even with the people who do not have the royalty-free commitments, and they're still looking to kind of create, a clearing place and a patent pool to actually do that, and I think it certainly could be an option. But like I said, I think there's plenty of other, like just taking a step back, when you look at the ecosystem, there's plenty of other great technologies out there that need licensing structures to really make them successful and to really unlock their value, so that there's visibility in terms of the IP risk. What is the IP royalty rate going to be? So we're much more focused on those areas and really digging into those and help creating these win-win situations for innovators and implementers, as opposed to trying to fight with the royalty-free contingent on the implementer side. We're really trying to create these things that are virtually impossible in terms of trying to create a truly royalty-free technology that's modern and as efficient and as best in class as some of the existing technologies. I think you're always going to have a hard time if that is your ultimate goal.
Last question on this topic, but somebody in the innovator space mentioned that if you look at the underlying technology of this royalty-free standard, it might look a lot like some of the standard technology. Do you have any, I guess, have you taken a look at that? Have you any thoughts about whether that might be the case or not?
I think it is the case, and it's just a natural thing, because if you look at what they're trying to do, usually what royalty-free standards, typically try to do is they go back to what they believe is the most modern version of the technology that they believe is now completely off patent and is in the public domain. Then what they try to do is they look at key features that you need to improve on to make it competitive in the commercial landscape. Well, when you do that, you're going to step on everyone else who was also independently developing intellectual property, maybe for the newer version of that technology that maybe is standardized under FRAND principles, and you're going to see a lot of overlap there. And sure enough, I've worked at Dolby long enough to see that that's exactly, what happens. So when you look at some of like the codec development, especially in the audio space, when AAC, for example, came out with a new version with HEAAC, then extended HEAAC, and then MPEG-H, you can also see some of the audio formats, the ones that are trying to compete with those on a purportedly royalty-free basis. They sure enough are stepping into the same intellectual property that was developed by these FRAND encumbered standards. And it's really unavoidable, because at the end of the day, there's only so many ways to actually solve some of the key problems that the marketplace is really demanding in that new technology. That's why, like I said, Eli, it's almost like an unwinnable battle if you really want to try to create a completely royalty-free codec that does not land or step on anyone's intellectual property apart from those innovators who have committed to the royalty-free pledge. So I don't think that's really a productive model at the end of the day. I don't think it's going to stop, the AO Media and the Open Alliance to continue doing that. But that's not something that we're super invested in. Like I said, there's plenty of other technologies out there that are completely just operating under RAND, with no RAND-Z kind of commitments whatsoever, that need licensing structures and could use the benefit of a patent pool like VIA. That's what we're really focused on.
What comes to mind? Like, there's a big need in the space.
I can't give away the secret sauce, quite yet. So I can tell you that so one of the things I did right when I came into VIA is I reorganized the organization. So I created a new group that's focused just on strategy and growth. Then I also reorganized the program management team. So Alen J, who's been with the organization for 20 years, now oversees all of program management for the organization. So I think these two changes have really unlocked a lot of kind of latent value in the organization that was never tapped before. So we're now seeing a lot of great new ideas coming up from that new division that's really focused on strategy and growth. And we're also just seeing our program kind of management function solidified under Alen, really kind of doing what it needs to do to make all the programs successful. Case in point, the Chi program. So we're super excited about the organization. I'm super excited about the people that we currently have. They're a very talented group of IP professionals that have decades of experience in a lot of these spaces. And like I said, I think we're going to find those additional pockets and areas that we can move to that really are in need of a collaborative licensing solution.
So we'll stay tuned for that. But I guess when I look at the technology space, the big thing that's happening is a lot of AI, obviously a lot of AI innovation. The response to that one, there's a recent, I guess, maybe you call it a splash because you haven't heard much about it since, is the Shared AI License Foundation. It was started by some big tech companies and I guess one of these foundational model companies. What do you think about that initiative? And how does that shape your thinking?
I'm supportive of that initiative. So I believe what they were doing is they were trying to unlock the IP that's essential into creating like an LLM model just in and of itself, right? So that I think you do need some freedom to operate because obviously there's other LLMs out there that are trying to create models in very similar ways. So what they're doing in terms of trying to make sure that they're giving pledges that that IP is out there and freely available really will help that marketplace grow and continue to grow. And I am a firm believer that patent pools should be an enabler of technology. We're not here to be a roadblock. So anything that people can do to help create more certainty in the marketplace, allow people to have freedom to operate so that they can continue to develop, whether it's in the AI space or in other spaces. These are all, in my mind, very good things for those ecosystems. So I'm certainly supportive of that. And if you look at LLMs, like I said, there is some foundational IP that I believe a lot of these companies may own that they don't necessarily want to use to block others. They want to use to encourage others to enter into this space because everyone knows, AI is a big thing. And I think it will continue to be a big thing. So like I said, I'm supportive of things like this, not only in the AI space, but in other fields as well. Whenever people come together, try to find out solutions to market problems that really will help encourage increased adoption of technology, I think that's a good thing. And at the end of the day, like I said, I'm a big believer that technology is really the reason that we all care about intellectual property. We all understand that great technology has the ability to kind of create efficiencies in our work environment, create efficiencies in our home environment, and just really just unlock this hidden potential that we all have. And I'm looking forward for all of that new great technology to come. And I'm looking forward to VIA being a part of helping make those things a reality to the extent we establish pools in the marketplace that really do encourage that adoption.
But I'm curious, I mean, from your practical, realistic standpoint, obviously, if you look at this foundation, maybe one of the big frontier companies joined, AI research has happened for a long time in a lot of universities who might have patents. There might be other companies who have patents. How do you envision all of it playing out? Because, the concern that they signal is, is going to be impossible to do anything in the space if all these patents are being enforced. I guess from your experience, how do you think it will play out?
I think people are maybe oversimplifying it, right? Because there's probably very few patents that are really foundational. Usually when you look at any technology space, there's relatively few patents that are truly foundational to a new segment. What you see is there's a lot of patents that are specific on implementations that necessarily you don't really need to use. So I think in this space, there's probably some core intellectual property that that organization is trying to shore up, so people do have some comfort and freedom to operate. Then there's probably boatloads of kind of intellectual property on the peripheral that really isn't necessary to kind of do what you need to do. Maybe it would be nice to have, but in my mind, that's more of kind of the implementation specific, IP, not really the core foundational IP. So because there's not a lot of standards kind of in that space, you can imagine that there is a lot of just different paths that different companies are taking. And that's why I believe that a lot of that really isn't foundational and blocking to anyone kind of entering the market and actually doing what they need to do to be successful. But I think each like I said, each sector is different. And I don't want to over focus on, AI because that's just one. There's a lot of other sectors out there, like I said, that are in need of collaborative licensing and solutions. But at least that's the way I see it. And I think if you do the hard work and looking at the portfolios, you'll realize because a lot of technology is kind of incremental improvements over the state of the art that really has already been in development for a long, long time. Remember, AI is not new. So AI has been out there for a long, long time as well. So there's a lot of foundational IP that's probably already expired by now. And then there's obviously newer stuff related to LLMs that people really need to come together, really create some kind of unlocking mechanism to further that ecosystem. So like I said, we're going to play, whatever part we feel like we're comfortable in those spaces and in others. And, we're looking forward to kind of helping, like I said, again, make great technology more accessible.
Correct me if I'm wrong, most patent pools, I guess in the modern era, have formed around standards. Do you see a role for patent pools to play outside of that if there's not a standard? If there's technology that might be applicable to different types of implementations or
Right. I think you're absolutely right. So one of the things, I appreciated even a long time ago is there's a lot of technologies that may not be officially standardized, but essentially they operate almost as like a de facto standard. So maybe you can't say they're purely, they weren't generated by a standard setting organization per se, but they become almost de facto standards in the industry. And maybe there is like some white paper that you could try to, tee up to mapping some of the patents. But I think you could arguably create a program around some of these like de facto like standards where they're bodies of technology that maybe didn't go through the classical standard setting organization process and don't have that rubber stamp from an SSO. But for all practical purposes, they do function more or less like standards. And there's kind of a consistent body of technology there that you certainly could create a program around. And that is certainly something that we look at here at VIA as well. We don't just look at the black and white standards. We look at other things, de facto standards, other kind of bodies of technology as well that you could potentially create like joint licensing opportunities around, even if it's not strictly, under the pool construct. So Eli, certainly that was a really good question. We're certainly kind of exploring those areas as well.
and for something like that to happen, do you need, aside your secret sauce, but do you need like a licensor to one licensor to have a significant amount of patents in that de facto patent space for something like
You always
that?
get a licensor, Eli. I can tell you that much. We don't have licensor. I think you're right. You would want to have a major licensor that at least owns a majority of that intellectual property. And that's generally what we look at. I mean, generally, when we do our landscapes, that's generally what we're doing. We're looking at the patent landscape. We're trying to figure out who are the key patent holders and, how do we go about looking at a certain technology and figuring out first, does it even need a collaborative licensing model? Because if it's really just one or two people that own the whole space, Eli, they could just do bilaterals and everyone would be happy. So, but when you get to 3, 4, 5, 6, and some of our programs have even a dozen or more licensors, those are really begging for a collaborative licensing solution. And that's where I really think patent pools shine. But I think you're right. It could be as small as even just 3, you would think, in terms of whether the efficiencies are there in terms of doing 3 bilaterals versus taking a pool offering. So I think you could create a program as little as probably 3 people, as many as, like I said, dozens, like we have in some of our larger programs.
Yeah, seems your new pool team has a lot of interesting stuff to look at.
Well, a big world out there. So like I
Yeah.
said, I think there's just a lot of opportunities. So there's really, there's a lot of exploration that needs to be done. And there's a lot of opportunity out there. So we're looking forward to capitalizing on that.
I want to kind of take a step back to talk about patent pools. You've discussed how a lot of your patent pools have been super successful. If you go on your website and you click through your different pools, you see thousands of licensors for some of them. On a practical level, how does that happen? How does each one of these companies, and you're just getting to know, you said the ecosystem, but how do these smaller companies become licensors?
Well, it is through a lot of hard work. I can tell you that much. So we do have a really dedicated licensing team. But I think generally, if you look at the life cycle of a pool, and and I think you probably appreciate this, Eli, but maybe some of your listeners don't. But you obviously start at the beginning. So you start with just a handful of licensors, and then you work your way up, and eventually, once you start getting a couple of key licensees into the program, every pool reaches what I like to just call as the tipping point. And maybe it's around 50% of the intellectual property, for example. So once the pool acquires more than 50% of the intellectual property, and then eventually builds up its licensee base to acquiring more than 50% of the market in the program, then I think the writing is on the wall for the other licensees. They understand that this is a legitimate kind of program out there. There's plenty of enforceable IP, and a lot of them will step up and do the right thing, knowing that they're using someone else's technology.
Yes, sir. And I misspoke. I meant thousands of licensees. That's what kind of amazes me, that all these companies are stepping up and doing the right thing.
Well,
I
right.
guess that's the idea.
And I think it's because, like I said, after you've reached that tipping point, they understand that all of their competitors are already taking the license, so they're no longer at a competitive disadvantage. They also understand that there's been a lot of market adoption, so the rates that have already been set have been deemed, friend compatible. And they understand at the end of the day that the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, they're using someone else's technology, that they need to go and actually pay fair compensation for that. I'm a really big believer, I think, as is the current administration, that patents are property rights and they should be treated as such. So it's just like you, Eli. I can't go to your house and just take your car for a joyride and bring it back and say, no harm, no foul. I'm not going to give you any compensation for that. So, these people who are using standards, they're obviously using other people's technology, other people's creativity, other people's innovation. And I've really seen from my time, at Dolby and at other organizations, the blood, sweat, and tears that go into building new technology. It's not easy, especially trying to build new technology that's going to be standardized. Not every standard, is successful. I mean, it's actually the flip side. It's rare that a technology that's standardized does become widely successful, like our AVC and our AAC programs. So in order to do that, you need to obviously provide a fair return on investment, which does help fuel that cycle of innovation. Without it, it's very difficult to do that. And I think that just goes back to the whole root of the patent system, right? That's why the patent system in the United States was created, was to really encourage innovation. And we at VIA, we're a big believer in that process. We're a big believer, in patents that are, property rights. And we're a big believer, like I said, in creating kind of fair and balanced programs that help enable and encourage additional technology adoption.
And, I don't know if you agree it's the case, but you hear a lot about efficient infringement and bigger companies who might be in the IP news who decide not to take a license, right? And then you look at the list, some licensee list, and you're seeing all of these companies who are taking a license. And you are a litigator. You could say, if a small company came in, you would say maybe on a practical level, nobody's going to waste your time, filing a lawsuit against you because you're a smaller company or something like that. I mean, does it surprise you that so many companies are doing the right thing by taking a license, or is there something that maybe I don't appreciate about technology companies out there or implementers out there?
No, I think you understand it. I think it's just, the industry has come a long way from what it was just 5 or 10 years ago, right? So I think now everyone appreciates that intellectual property rights do represent technological innovation from a company that did, like I said, put their blood, sweat, and tears into building that technology. So I think people understand that. I think now most of the countries across the world recognize that. China, for example, I think you see now that they have great innovation, lots of patents coming out from a lot of great organizations over there. And that's why I think you see some of the licensors now, even in the VIA pools, are from countries and organizations that you would have expected just 5 years ago. And that's an encouraging sign. I think everyone understands now the value in the intellectual property system, not just in the US and in other regions, but really worldwide. They understand that it means that you really need to create this cycle of innovation to further develop the technology. And nowadays, you can't go down the street or even just taking a ride in the train without seeing everyone with, a smartphone in their hand, their wireless, earbuds, listening to music. So everyone understands the intrinsic value of technology and how it has really transformed our lives. And I think people are just beginning to appreciate that part of that is actually, like I said, participating in the system, joining collaborative licensing structures and patent pools like the ones that VIA offers to ensure that innovators are fairly rewarded for their actual R&D development so that they can continue to create, new and great technology, but at the same time, not setting the price so high that implementers are going to be overly burdened by very, very high royalties that are going to cut into their margins and make it difficult for them to actually deploy the technology. So that again just goes back to finding that sweet spot, Eli. And we have a really great team that does a very good job at that. And I think that is a testament to why our programs are so successful right out the door.
At least over your 12 years, it seems that you're seeing an improvement in terms of, I guess, implementers paying licensing fees for patents as a cost of making their products. And that's kind of a standard way of doing business, at least.
Right. I think it's because, a lot of these big companies, they have teams of researchers as well that are innovating, and they are also filing patents, and they want their intellectual property to be respected. So if these companies want their intellectual property to be respected, then they in turn need to respect others' intellectual property. So I think that trend is just generally catching on, and we're seeing it, across the globe, basically.
On a practical level, let's say there's a company out there that's not normally in the business of, implementing one of these standards, but then they have engineers who come, who say, we should do something with this. On a practical level, what should they do? Should they Google to see which patent pool kind of licenses the standard? Should they call that which pool administrator licenses that, has a pool for that, call that pool up?
I would encourage them, and maybe this is a self-serving answer, I would encourage them to contact one of the great professionals in our organization, because these are great ideas. And this is how we do get some of our ideas, believe it or not. Because of our reputation in the industry, we do have people coming up to us and saying, hey, I'm an intellectual property holder here. I don't really think I'm going to have time to actually build a product and go into market, but this technology is great, and we want to try to help do what's right for the ecosystem and enable this in a transparent manner. So certainly reaching out to people on my team, whether or not it makes sense to create a patent pool because there's a lot of upfront costs in that process, that's a different question. But we also can provide them, valuable tools that should help them and at least guide them on the right path to figuring out what they need to do.
Well, that seems like a great resource. But I'm actually talking more about on the implementer side. On a practical level, how do you advise them to proceed? They might be browsing, let's say, your website. What should they do next, I guess?
Yeah. Right. So I think when you look at our website, if you need to actually take a license or either want to join a license, we make it very easy. So we are a big believer in transparency. So when you go onto our websites, you will find usually, very clearly stated the actual licensing fees. You will find an FAQ page that talks about what are the class of products that need to be licensed that fall outside of the license. You'll also find a way, if you do have intellectual property you want to join, there's obviously a way to actually join the program as well once it's been launched. And there's even a way to even do new submissions. So if you don't even see anything on our website that really fits what you're looking for, like I said, you can also come to us and actually talk to us about trying to create a new program within VIA to help facilitate the market. But we try to make the website as easy to use as possible. So it's really this one-stop shop where you can go and get all the information you need for the programs that you need, understand what the rates are that are being charged, and figuring out whether or not you want to join or not. And I would encourage them too to look at our competitors too and see if they have, competing offerings in the space, because there is some overlap, as you know, with certain technologies.
There still seems to be this, I don't know if you sense that or not, but that there's some mystery around these patent pool administrators, and these patent pools. And you just described everything is on your website. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's some disconnect about that?
Well, I think historically, some administrators weren't opening up a lot of this information. So I think we have now recently partnered with WIPO and their patent scope project. So we are trying to make our patent list, for example, for our AAC program, integrated into some of the other tools that people are already using. So I think a lot of it just goes down to the simple fact that there wasn't a lot of transparency in the industry in the past. You would have licensors coming together, forming a pool, and just publishing a rate card without much more information in terms of, well, how were the rates set? What does the full royalty stack look like? What types of products are included, what are not? So there was a lot of just ambiguity. The devil is in the details. And that's why when you go and you actually create a pool, you really learn that when you go through all of the commercialization documents that it takes to really launch a new program. There's just a lot of moving pieces. It's not the easiest for kind of new entrants to kind of understand. But I think now that patent pools are becoming even more mainstream, people are recognizing them as efficiency creation vehicles that they are. And I think patent pool administrators are doing a much better job at actually, like I said, being transparent and open on things like their websites and their marketing materials for their programs. So that certainly is going to continue to be the path that we're going to take at VIA, continuing to increase transparency and continuing to make our programs very accessible to both licensors and licensees. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes a successful program, when you're bringing a lot of licensors and a lot of licensees together.
We talked about how for a patent pool to work, you probably need the major licensors, those who have most of the patents, to join one of these patent pools. I've talked to some, maybe, I think when I interviewed Heath Hoagland, he said everybody has to be a little bit unhappy for a patent pool to work, right? But what is the balance between the bigger licensors and the smaller licensors? Because I feel like sometimes the smaller licensors feel like, well, I have no choice but just to accept whatever the structure
Yeah,
is.
I only got a couple minutes, so I'll try to answer this. So this is a really good question, because you do see those dynamics, play out in the actual pool meetings themselves. So the larger, licensors, because they have a larger share and they're generally the ones that also enforce their intellectual property. There is, like you said, almost like dual roles in some of these pools, where you have a subset of licensors that maybe are the larger ones that actually have litigation worthy assets that are really driving the momentum behind the pool. Then you do have relatively medium or smaller patent holders that are there to contribute their IP in a meaningful way, but they may not be as proactive about it. So I think the pools, the pools really need both, because you want to clean up the ecosystem. You don't want to have a lot of intellectual property operating outside of the pool that's just going to create additional risk for would-be new licensees that want to join. So there's a place for both of them, understanding that they actually play very different roles behind the scenes in the success of the program. And I can't go into detail about what pools do, but there are metrics that you can do and things that you can do in designing the pool to ensure that those larger licensors who maybe will litigate more and actually be more proactive in making the pool successful are rewarded for that increased risk. Whereas the smaller licensors who are coming, may not be entitled to some of those benefits. So there's things that you can do. But that's probably another discussion in terms of pool design that you could probably spend another hour on, Eli.
Last question is, you just had the VIA Summit in Rome. There's a lot of developments. You shared that this administration seems friendly towards patents and friendly towards SEPs and maybe patent pools. In Europe, you see some of the proposals there went away. What is your mood of the ecosystem, I guess, from that summit?
Generally, the current administration, at least in the US, currently, decidedly favorable to SEP holders, patent pools, and the like. I think, like I said, they do view intellectual property, as do I, as a property right. So that means they are now, and I think you look at the USPTO and the DOJ, there actually are comments talking about the potential for patent holders to obtain injunctions, for example, in the US more readily, not even foreclosing the possibility of an injunction, for example, on an SEP. So I think that's very important. I think the other thing too is people always presume that SEPs kind of conveyed market power in and out of the box. I think they're actually questioning that rationale as well, because that certainly may not always be the case. And finally, I think they're seeing that people are seeing that the rate setting and negotiation process really isn't an antitrust concern. It really is a arm's length negotiation between two parties that at least some people view outside of the antitrust framework. So all of these things are really pro patentee, and I think we're seeing a shift back into that direction after a long time it being the other way. So the current mood, I think, in the current environment, like I said, is, I think, more favorable and friendly to patent holders, patent pools, and SEP participants, alike. So it's a very good question, Eli. So thank you for that one.
All right. Well, Kevin, thank you for joining Clause 8. All right. I appreciate you running a bit over.
Take care. Talk to you later.